We're live. Hello, I am Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Welcome. First of all, my apologies for the rather ghastly lighting conditions I'm dealing with. Thank you very much in advance for bearing with me. But yes, I've got some stuff I need to get out of my brain today. You'll notice from the title I talked about the Hobbit Generation, contingency plans, and spiritual essentialism. I've got some stuff, and it's time to unload it before my poor head explodes. Now, if you're wondering what on earth I could possibly mean by the Hobbit generation, allow me to explain. I was scrolling through Pinterest, and I came across this beauty from this person called the George Marston with the atom bomb, something or other. Um, and this is what they had to say. Y'all, none of us have to be millennials anymore. If you were born between the animated Lord of the Rings 1978 and Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring 2001, you're the Hobbit generation. Promised wealth and adventure, but finding only war and ruin. Love ya. And as soon as I saw that, I felt it down to my very bones because how true that is. We are indeed, what a beautiful description, the Hobbit generation. When you think about, when we're first introduced to the Hobbits in the Lord of the Rings story, we come through Hobbiton, we see these really cute, picturesque, cottagey little hobbit holes and other architecture. And you can tell that more or less things are going well for their society. People, they put in their crops, they harvest things, they're raising their livestock, raising their children, getting together with relatives, and they're just kind of having a nice, normal, relatively trouble-free life. Good, decent people. They aren't burdened down by anything. They're just there, and they're living their lives, and they're doing their things, and things are going along pretty smoothly. And I feel like for those of us who came of age, during the 90s and the early 2000s, that is essentially the world that was presented to us because, the Cold War ended, and people of different races and backgrounds and religions were getting along, and there's a lot of live and let live. And maybe we don't need to be nasty to people we disagree with. Maybe if someone's living a different lifestyle, maybe that isn't the end of the world. You let them do their thing. You do your thing. Say please and thank you, and we'll all rub along together very well. And so we did. And then, ever since then, we've had a series of disasters, haven't we, gang? I remember the first big shock to my system, and upon coming of age, was really the 2001 terrorist attack. The World Trade symbol, buildings went down, and suddenly the nation's at war, and all this stuff, and the young men who I had graduated from school only the year before. All of a sudden, I mean, they were talking about going into the military. Even some of the young men who I knew from the Jehovah's Witness cult, they said, "Oh, well, if I wasn't a Jehovah's Witness and forbidden from doing it, I think I really should be enlisting in the military. I mean, you can't have your country attacked like that and not respond." I mean, there was this sense of not just individual autonomy, but also a sense of belonging, which is something the country has really lost now. We don't feel like we all belong to the same nation. We don't feel like our politicians, for all their faults, are ultimately fighting on the same side as we are. Indeed, we have daily proof that quite the reverse is the case. But we had the 2001, then we had the 2008, absolute banking collapse. We've had COVID, and here we have banks failing left and right. So I guess we're going to have our very own, 1929 style issue there. Only it's 2023 banking collapse. Fun times, fun times. We've had no stability in our adult lives, and a lot of the seeds that were planted by the boomers and the upper Gen Xers, I just feel like a lot of those seeds have come to fruition, and we've been experiencing the consequences for their misjudgments. And that's what we're dealing with. And I think worst of all, and what really makes it tough for us, is just having to adjust our mindset, because the world was presented to us in fairly I'm trying to think of the word I want to use, but it's the world was not this malevolent place. Obstacles were something that you could overcome. Your goals were achievable. If you made a mistake, it wasn't the end of the world. It doesn't mean you were going to spiral into this, goodness knows where, the floor of that spiral would be. It was just like things were going to be okay, that you had what it took, you'd been given the knowledge, and that things were going to work out. And then, ever since then, we've discovered that is just not the case. and having to overcome this base programming that we got ever since we were kids. I mean, that's been a difficult process of deprogramming. And of course, another thing that's really worked against us is the way that, tolerance and acceptance was preached to us as just this absolute value, an absolute value and a value that was at the top of the pyramid of all of the values. And I understand for a little bit why our parents did tend to lead us down that path, because they saw what could happen if people were entirely too judgmental, if people were trying to lord over other people and telling them how to live instead of minding their own affairs. So I do get that. But the inability to have any kind of judgment, to be able to even tell what's good or bad for yourself, I think we're seeing the consequences of that. Because look at the generation of kids that our generation has raised. The kids are not okay. They are messed up. They are mentally ill. They don't even know who or what they are. I mean, that's an astonishing, degradation. And we've done it to ourselves and we've done it to them. And, there's nothing for it but just to acknowledge what's going on around us and try to fight our way through it. I mean, and just also think back of how things were in the 90s. Do you remember when people suddenly went from saying something was good or bad to starting to say, oh, well, that's inappropriate or appropriate? And then that, morphed a few years later into positive or negative, which is one of the many reasons why it drives me absolutely mental, the way so many people use positive and negative, because what they actually mean is good and bad. And I'm sitting over here, in witchdom thinking, okay, positive is action, negative is inaction or reaction. And it's just, it makes me mental, because when people are using those terms, I do think that it does kind of tend to gum up the works for people who study the craft. But also, I think it really distorts the meaning of what positive and negative actually mean, just in general. I mean, it all stems from fear. People are afraid to say, whether something is good or bad. They're afraid to say appropriate or inappropriate, because really, who are they to determine that? I mean, that's always what the challenge is. Who are you to judge? Who are you to know? Who are you to have standards of any kind? Well, it turns out all of us kind of need standards, because look what not having them has gotten us. Not good, gang. Not good, gang. It is a problem. So, us Hobbit generationals, we've had our challenges. Now, the good thing, the inspiring thing we can really take from that story was, like us, the various hobbits in the Lord of the Rings stories, whether we're talking about Bilbo Baggins or Frodo Baggins, they were going about their lives. They were perfectly content. They liked where they were at. They didn't have any big plans. They just wanted life to continue to go along. But when they had to rise to the occasion, they did. So I do find that very inspiring, actually. It's like this reminder in storytelling that, yes, though you thought your life was going to be a certain way, guess what? It's not going to be. You can rise to the occasion, and you will be all the better for rising to that occasion. Go out there and do what needs to be done. I find that very inspirational and very motivational. And before we get too far off the Lord of the Rings track, because there are other things I want to discuss today, do you remember the beginning, the prologue of the first Lord of the Rings movie? It was that voiceover from Galadriel, and she's giving you this kind of overview of the general history of how the story came to start, where it was going to start in the movie. And I remember that speech she gave of the world has changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the wind. Much that once was is now lost. I feel that and relate to that more every single freaking day. I tell you what, that's one movie that I hope, I don't really want that movie to be redone, because so much of what it was done so beautifully. And I don't think you'd get the same performance if it was done nowadays. And I also don't think that you would actually get the same core message from it if it was to be remade today. So anyone who has ideas about that, leave it alone. You don't redo the Mona Lisa. You don't redo the Lord of the Rings. Just saying. So that kind of takes me into my next thought about, the world has changed. Things that once were are now lost. That's another thing that I don't think that I can relate to. I think other people are very much in that same boat. And there we go. And that leads me to this other little meme that I found, again, courtesy of Pinterest. It was a quote from Cornelius Tacitus, which I think it is the Tacitus who also did oh, was it Saxo Grammaticus that Tacitus did? Something or other. I forget which. But he said, formerly we suffered from crimes, now we suffer from laws. I'm feeling that. Are you? Amanda says, diversity diversifies our portfolios. Yeah, that it does. It's a diversify your portfolio or else you may not make it. I mean, we are really being faced with some pretty serious choices, especially if the response to our current financial difficulties is handled in the dumbest way possible. And when you consider who the people are at the wheel, I'm kind of banking on we're going to see the dumbest possible responses to pretty much everything these days. So, yeah, we're going to have to, we're on our own, kids. We're going to have to think of what to do for ourselves. But I want to go back to what Tacitus is saying here. Formerly we suffered from crimes, now we suffer from laws. Laws, regulations, the requirements of various tech platforms, the corporations in general, all of these institutions are requiring people to act in a manner which does not serve their best interest. It is actively getting in the way of people becoming independent, of people becoming successful, of people exercising greater autonomy over their lives in general. And why would you have that motivation? It's because you want to be in charge. You want people to start doing what you say. I mean, it really is as black and white as all of that. I mean, people wonder, is there some kind of dark, nefarious, complicated scheme behind the scenes? No, it's very commonplace thuggery. There are people who want to be in charge and they're willing to use force, or they're willing to use the curly cueing of the law in order to be in charge and to make you bend the knee and do their will, because that's how they get off. That's how they think life should be, that everyone should be doing what they say, because then maybe finally that will fill up the empty hole that is their soul. And that brings me to the next thing. And we are working up to this because we all have an appointment with karma. We might even be saying we are experiencing a bit of karma in the financial sector right now. See what the hashtag shitology posted? Karma is a bitch? Oh no, honey. Karma is a classy, wise elder that will calmly sit you down and serve you a tea you later realize was laced with the same poison you served others for years. That, I think, is what is happening to us. We are finally getting that dose of our own medicine. We are finally coming to grips with all of the doublethink and the doublespeak that has been going on for generations, absolute generations. And we are starting to realize that all of the logical inconsistencies, all of the stupidity, it has consequences. And now we are getting those consequences in the form of everything we were dishing out. It's now coming back to us. This is also an excellent testimony in favor of the law of return. That fussy old thing that witches used to tell other witches that it didn't exist, as if the law of cause and effect, had a special exception for witches and it just didn't apply to us. We're learning better now. We're learning better now, and we are learning the hard way. And that's something that I don't really see a way out of. We're going to learn the hard way. We weren't able to convince people in time, in recent days, we've had conversations on the server about, no one listened to Cassandra. She had all of this prophecy that was accurate, but she was cursed where no one would believe her. And of course, no one did until after the city of Troy fell to the Greeks. I mean, and it's the same that we see with people who've been that canary in the mine in political and cultural issues. No one believed them until they were hit smack in the face with the consequences and decided that was unpleasant. Everybody kept rolling along irresponsibly until that started to happen. So things are coming to a head. We are starting to see the ultimate results in the harvest for all of that. And so in this season of planting seeds, I think we're like, okay, since we can't get out of what is coming and what is unfolding in real time, can we be a little bit more serious and a little bit more thoughtful about what seeds we're planting? Just a thought, tossing it out there. If we can't save ourselves, could we at least save the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren? Just a thought. Now, on a related note to the world just kind of generally spinning out of control, and none of us really knows what's going to happen next, because a lot of things are occurring that make us poorer, that make us more vulnerable, that make us more dependent upon institutions, and we know it's not good for us. We know it's not good for us, and so we're all trying to form contingency plans And right now, especially with the finances, people are talking a lot about prepping. They're talking about different ways to move your money around. They're talking about trying to arrange your circumstances to where you can be elsewhere, to where you can be perhaps in a more rural setting, to where you have the ability, maybe to keep a little bit of livestock, at least have room for a garden. Do things that you can do now to try to make yourself more independent and more self-sufficient, so that whatever happens, you are not as vulnerable. And if it sorts itself out, then you're well prepared, you're more independent, you still have that skill set, you didn't lose anything. And if things really get out of control, well, you're better off than your neighbors who, didn't take anything seriously at all. So a lot of people are talking about that. I'm also thinking about how, as things spin out of control, whenever things really start to get weird, we also start to see an uptick in censorship. Now, many of you who follow this channel will be aware that last July, the Blackbirds Brew group on Discord got completely and totally nuked. No warning, not the slightest indication that anything was wrong. I don't even remember conversations that happened at the time that could have been considered even remotely out of order. Most of the people in the group are far less radicalized than I am. They're still very much like, we can totally use the system and that'll totally work, and we can totally bring our civilization back. And the gods know that I do hope that they're ultimately right about that. But you get my point. There was nothing happening there that would have been this huge red flag for Discord, but they got rid of us anyway. Now, luckily, less than 24 hours later, the Gilded group, I got to hear about it. I set up the group and we were back underway, and we've been building ourselves up ever since. And if you caught my live stream over the weekend, you'll know that I've been working pretty hard, try to expanding its functionality. And of course, the nice thing with Gilded is that you have different types of channels. Some are text channels where you converse back and forth. Others are voice channels, and I always make sure that you have the video camera in case people want to talk face to face, which I think is incredibly important. But we also have document channels. We have forums. We have different kinds of channels to where we can store information and readily and more easily access it, which has been a very big thing for me. I mean, it's no good us sharing all of our knowledge if we can't find it later. So, as all this has been going on, I've really redoubled my efforts to try to find a backup plan, just in case anything were to happen to Gilded. I'm not anticipating anything immediately, but I'd rather have a backup ready and not need it than need it and not have it. I don't want to be caught off guard like that again. And so I do have something that is prepared. I'm keeping it hidden in the back pocket just in case we need it. If anything does occur, I'll announce it on this channel for sure. That way people can get reconnected. But I have to tell you, I mean, the pickings are pretty slim. All of the different kind of server community setups that I found, they do not have the same functionality as Gilded. We would not be able to have this nice repository of knowledge to where we could easily look things up and find them again if we wanted and needed to. It doesn't have any of that. It's now the one where I'm set up, your channel where you text like this, you can also add media and share links and do voice and video chats. That's all very good, but it's essentially all the same kind of channel. So I'm like, man, I mean, I really would not be able to do with the group what I'm hoping to accomplish with it if we were ever forced to use that. So I'm really hoping it doesn't come to that. But I'm just like, man, I mean, that would really be a setback. That would be very, very difficult. So I started thinking about, well, maybe ultimately what we need is a website. And then I got thinking, hey, who's going to make it? And of course, with a website, you would need your own domain name. I would really need someone who actually knew what they were doing to properly set that up. Because as you all know, there are definite limits to my technological capabilities. I'm sorry. I've learned a lot in the past year, but I don't have such a big head as to think that I would be very successful in the kind of undertaking that would be required. Because for a website, for one, I would want to make sure that we still had that real-time chat capability, because I don't want the members to lose that, because that's how you start getting connected with other people and networking and making friends and all that other good stuff. I would really want to make sure that we had video chat capability. So that's a huge thing right there. And then I would want to make sure that we also had different tabs and pages of information within the site to where people could use it for research, to where people could essentially have their columns where they could readily share their own work, whether it takes the form of blogs or videos or whatever it is that they're doing. I would want to make sure that people had their own individual spots. I would want to make sure that we essentially had an encyclopedia on pretty much every pagan subject imaginable, including the practical application of our knowledge. I've really been getting into the practical application. I've absolutely lost patience with a lot of the more distant, skeptical meanderings of theorizing, and maybe it could be this or that, and aren't we enlightened for figuring all these things out? And I'm getting kind of forced into this mold of Master Yoda of, your mind is not where you are on what you're doing, and that's really where it needs to be. Oh, you figured out this wonderful remote magical thing. Goody for you. Do you know how to do a basic healing spell? If you had to, could you cast your own circle? Do you know how to actually perform these things? And if you're not a witch, what about devotional paganism? Do you know how to conduct ritual, to honor the gods at different times a year in accordance with whatever is customary in your own particular path? It seems like we would benefit from having resources to that. And that's what takes me to the other thing about spiritual essentialism, and what is really, really worrying me, because we live in an unstable world, because our access to information and our ability to communicate readily through the digital forums, that really compromises the elite's ability to control people. And I think they are very much signaling that they're sick of it. They don't mind people talking and exchanging things if they're, towing the line. Or, if they may not like what's going on, but at least if they're not saying it, if you can intimidate them into silence, that's all they really require. Because that means you're not getting in their way, and they can continue to lord it over you and rule over you. That's all they really want. So this cancel culture, and I think it is directly related to the elite's desire to maintain their positions, to expand their power, and to have greater control. And so they are having to get rid of the opposition. And what we've seen so far, as unpardonable and inexcusable as it is, those are just the beginning birth pangs of what we have in store for us if we don't start righting our society. It would get much worse. They would have to silence people, and then from there, they would probably have to take nastier measures to get them out of the picture. Remove people from the equation, because these are people who cannot tolerate rivals. They do not want competition, and they definitely don't want any kind of threats to anyone who would bring their power structure to an end. So they're going to continue to come after us. So I wonder, okay, people wonder about a lot of different things to prep for. What if the money system really goes haywire and there's just no coming back for it, and we're in a bad way there? Or, what if there's an EMP that goes off and, the whole nation's affected? Would we be able to survive in essentially what would be 1800s like conditions? But on top of all that, I'm saying, what about the spiritual component? Because as time gets tough, people historically, as a pattern, they tend to find religion. And they not only find religion, they tend to find a very virulent religion. They will find a doctrine that says, this is to blame for all of your troubles. Do what we say. Stick with us. You'll be part of the team. You'll be a little more protected, and you'll be a good person. And we really can't tolerate anybody outside of our form. That's what I'm very much afraid of. I think we would see a sharp uptick of religious radicalism, and I think we're already starting to see the beginning pangs of it. Mostly because the Church of Woke is so out of bounds. I mean, show me a person of any religion at this point who's, actually okay. We have, the different members of the Abrahamic religion speaking out against their excesses. We have atheists speaking out against their excesses. You have pagans like me and Georgia Liberty talking a lot about their excesses, like that is just flat out wrong. What they are doing, that is not okay. That is detrimental to all of human society. And the reason why we're all outraged, of course, is because, there are common human values that translate no matter what religion you happen to cleave to. But when things get difficult and people get more tribal, they're not going to be looking for that common ground. And that worries me, because that could be a very big problem for us. And so my question to my fellow pagans out there, if we can see with reasonable certainty that there's a likelihood we're going to see an uptick in religious belief, do you want people going to the Abrahamic religions, or do you want them finding their way to us, finding their way to their ancestral gods, and finding their way into principles that are grounded in the world as it is, as it actually functions, to where they are more focused on their efforts about right doing and the practicing of virtue and building up their families and their communities, as opposed to trying to store up good deeds to go to heaven. What do you think ultimately ends up in a better situation for us? I think we're in a much better situation if we live in a society where there's at least an appreciation for the practicality of pagan principles. So that's something to think about. Another thing to think about when it comes to spiritual essentialism is, we have grown very accustomed to be able to find out whatever information we want on pretty much any spiritual topic, whether we're reading a book or reading an article, or if it's something that we find on the internet. We have access to so much information, and it has really been fantastic for the pagans who are inclined by their nature to be extremely eclectic, because, in whatever rabbit hole they want to go down to, I mean, there is an avenue, there's pathways, you can do searches, you can absolutely do that. But what if, for whatever reason, we didn't have that? What if we didn't have the internet? What if we lost our libraries? Sadly, one of the members of Blackbird's Brew, I think it was about a year ago or within the past couple of years, had a devastating house fire, lost practically everything. It was absolutely horrible. And one of the things she was telling me about, among the things lost, were journals. I mean, we can rebuy a book as long as it's in print, but you're not going to be able to recreate someone's journal that they handed you down, whether that was, a journal of one of your ancestors, or it was a magical journal of something that someone had practiced and discovered and really fleshed out. There are things that you cannot replace, and that's really scary to me. So, how much information do we really have within our own heads? And I think this is a question that is very, very relevant for pagans, because uh, we don't have a centralized book. I mean, with our Abrahamic religions, I mean, the Jews have the Torah and the Christians have the Bible and the Muslims have the Quran. So if they were reduced to one book, they know the book that they're grabbing. If they have a house fire and they can only save one book, they know the book that they are grabbing. And within that book, it contains enough of their lore and enough of their general principles and belief practices that they could essentially reconstitute their religions from that one book. And for pagans, it's a lot more complicated, because for one, we don't worship just one set of gods. We don't just have one set of stories to keep track of. And for witches, oh my goodness gracious. I mean, the different jobs that we do just magically. And then there's also the issue of, what about priestly duties? If civilization, goes back to kind of a state of zero, which I'm not saying it will, and hopefully it won't, but, if it did, you're going to need people who are there to be doing the blessing of the babies, the blessing of the crops, to be performing rites of passage rituals, doing hand fastings, hand partings, performing pagan funerals. You're going to need people who have the capability of doing all of those things. And it's probably going to be better if someone kind of has a core template in their brain. I mean, I don't think any of us do exactly the same thing every single time we are called upon to perform a witchy function or to celebrate a particular pagan festival. It's not, a complete copy and paste. Everything's always the same. But there are common themes, and there's kind of a template. There's an order of events when you are conducting ritual. Do you have enough of that in your head to where if it was just you and these things needed to be done, that you could step up to the plate? And I'd like to especially reach out to our pagan wives and mothers. In many pagan societies, particularly the Germanic and Nordic societies, the lady of the house was essentially functionally the house priestess. She was expected to have a certain amount of magical lore and a capability at her disposal. She was expected to be able to do certain things. Are we living up to our grandmothers in that regard? I think these are things worth thinking about, because what is important? What is, if we had to make a list of the most important principles of our own paths, and of course, depending upon which gods you work with, the nature of your practice, this is going to look a little bit different for every pagan. But can you define for yourself what your core principles are? What are stories or knowledge that you think needs to exist, no matter what, period? What templates of ritual do you find yourself going back to time and again? What is the kind of knowledge that you would want to make sure you passed on if we had kind of a civilization reset situation? Because, I mean, if we think that there's a heavy responsibility to teach the young now, I mean, just wait to where if all they knew was essentially what we could tell them. That is a terrifying idea, because there's a lot of things that, thanks to our technology and thanks to our access to information, we have not had to fully master. And because we have not had to fully master it, we have, I don't want to say stunted our growth, but we haven't been pushed into a position to where we felt like, okay, my next step in my journey is I need to become someone capable of teaching these things. Now, I think I've made the case through particularly my series on the Havamal, the value of pagan lore when dealing with everyday life, human relationships, making decisions, and just really perceiving and interacting with the world. There's a lot of value there. Maybe some people, that if there was only one thing they could grab, maybe it would be a copy of the Havamal. That would actually be a really good thing to grab. Maybe for Wiccans, I mean, maybe it's maybe you grab your grimoire, kind of like, here's kind of my everything. Here's my base level of practice. As long as I have this, I am good to go. Let's see. Oh, Amanda, let's see. It's a very Blue Lagoon feeling. I'm not familiar with what Blue Lagoon is. You'll have to let me know in the comments, Amanda, if you'd be so very, very kind. There are gaps in my knowledge, I'm sorry to say, and that was one of them. But I think it's just time to not just think about these things, but actually put them into practice. Uh, do we have backup copies of of important documents that prove who we are and what we're doing and what we own and all that good stuff? Do we have preparation set aside if we had another another event where suddenly something happened and everyone and their brother was buying up all the toilet paper again? Do we have we learned the lessons of recent years by being a little bit more prepared and being a little bit more independent? And have we learned the necessary spiritual lessons? Are we someone who has become fully realized in their faith? Have we matured in our faith? Are we able to carry on in our practices and be able to move forward to it and be able to pass that on as something worthwhile? I think it's time to get serious about it. I really do. And again, I mean, it's not because I think something will absolutely happen or that we're on the brink of doom or anything like that. I'm just saying is that there's a lot of instability. And when things are unstable, it's a good time to take a look at your own surroundings and make sure that you know what you are doing with what and how. That's what I am saying. Let's see, and Amanda, Blue Lagoon, beautiful movie about shipwrecked children. Oh, okay, yeah, okay. I'm on your wavelength now. That absolutely does make sense. And I think before I go, I want to touch on something, because I know for a lot of practitioners, because a lot of us in our own past experiences, we've had people who really tried to force and impose their own belief systems onto us. And so it's kind of an anathema to suggest that there would be requirements of anything. I mean, you have a lot of nonconformists who came to paganism. And at the beginning of the revival, I think that's really what was needed. You needed people who were not going to conform, people who were going to say, this particular religion doesn't make sense to me, or I don't find that I believe in it, so I'm going to go exploring. And, oh, someone doesn't like what I believe and practice now. Oh, well, sucks to be them. You needed people with that kind of backbone. And we do still need people with that backbone. But the trouble is, when that's the only mindset in the pagan community, or when it's the dominant mindset, that tends to create a situation where we're scattering apart rather than coming together. And so now I do perceive a need to have a balancing, not an abandonment of, having, full respect for people, choosing and believing in as their conscious dictates. I mean, we definitely don't want to lose that, but we need to have a balance of saying that, it's okay for us to have things in common. The goal of paganism is not to see how different you can turn yourself into or how much obscure knowledge you can track down. It's about a way of life. It's about a way of forming community with one another, and it's about strengthening relationships. It's about finding where you fit in the greater fabric of society, but also the universe. Where do you fit into that big picture? And to know that, I mean, you have to be able to come together. So I don't know what it's going to take to help us break down our resistance to that, but I think it would be a good idea if we start started having those conversations and started having those conversations without having to make a lot of caveats of, I'm not telling anyone what to do, and I'm not saying I have all the answers or this is the only right way. We need to get past that part of the conversation. We really do. And we need to start talking about, okay, X, Y, and Z has been very helpful to me. X, Y, and Z is really foundational. If you've got X, Y, and Z, you've got a foundation that you can build upon, and that's really beneficial for you to kind of wrestle with these ideas. These are helpful practices. I'm not saying you have to do any or all of them, but at least by experimentation, you are a little bit better off and you can start finding your feet. I do think that we need to start thinking about that coming of the together, particularly because our society is becoming more tribal, and I really don't see that trend reversing. I do not. I think it's going to carry on, and that's going to be particularly important for pagans because we are a religious minority. So being able to come together more and hopefully more in the face-to-face zone, and sooner or later we might have our own little enclaves. And when we do, we'll probably think about, okay, what celebrations do we have in common? Because there's literally no one, giving us the stink eye for doing any of those things. So there's no reason not to do this. We will start to have customs. We'll start to have, this is how we celebrate Ostara. This is kind of the general format that we use, not because it's the only way, but just because that's what it will eventually become customary. I mean, if I today moved into a community that was primarily Norse pagans, I wouldn't be going in there saying, oh, well, you have to fully respect my own personal way of doing things. I'd say, no, what do you guys do? How do you go about your affairs when we celebrate our holidays? And what's the general expectation for community members? And that's what I would conform to. Now, for my own private practices, there are things I would certainly do, but I wouldn't be showing up, to the Norse pagan town ritual to celebrate Ostara and saying, I don't see why you're not doing the ritual the way I've always done it. No, I would be cooperating with what had already been established, and that would be okay. It would not diminish me. It would not lock me in a dishonest situation or force me to be untrue to any of my convictions. It's just that there would be things I would come together to do with the community, and there would be things that I would do privately as a private expression of faith. I think it would be very healthy for us to move into that general direction. Whether or not, our current difficulties in society completely blow up in our faces or not, I think the end destination has got to be people actually coming together again and coming together on that common ground. And we need to have, our enclaves where we do feel a little bit more safe and secure. That way, once the mood shifts and we are able to start reaching out to our neighbors and forming relationships based on common human values, if not religious or political values. Until we get there, we do need to start coalescing amongst ourselves and in doing that. So those are my thoughts. I hope it wasn't too rambly. Thank you very much for hanging out with me. I'm going to be doing little bits and bobs around the server probably this afternoon. Oh, I forgot. I think I did forget to post the link to Blackbird's Brew. Well, if you want the link, you haven't joined us already, comment. I will make sure that you have the link, or I might go back and pin it. That would probably be the simplest thing. I'll go back. I'll pin the link to join the group in the comment section just because, again, I forgot earlier. Oh, that happens. But come and check us out. Come meet us. Let's talk about ideas about how we can form communities, hopefully face-to-face, especially over the long term. Lots of different ideas and different ways of going about that. But I do ultimately think that is the way forward. And of course, tonight we are doing the third installment of the Chakra Workshop. We're going to be talking about our successes and our challenges in working with the solar plexus chakra. We'll be meeting in the workroom voice and video channel at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, and that'll be 7:30 Eastern, 5:30 Mountain, 4:30 Pacific. And we'll just have a conversation. This is about sharing experiences. This is really the phase where, okay, I'm showing you my work. This is where I got with it. And I'm just looking forward to hearing about how this really goes along. We're 3 chakras in. And so I'm kind of anticipating that part of that discussion will be, how has, going through this process, how has it brought you this far? Are you continuing to notice improvements in the state of, your root chakra and your sacral chakra? What's been challenging you the most so far? And, are you kind of going back and dealing with some of those issues? So that's what the conversation that's going on tonight. You're very welcome to join in with us, and hope you will. But I think I have rambled long enough. I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.